Salam and peace. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. We are on Galaxy 19 satellite, where perhaps you're watching us. We are also on muslimnetwork.tv, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and pretty soon on Apple TV as well, and good amount of social media and network. This is a place where you hear conversation which are informed but not found all around the country as easily as here. So this is critical. And today I'm going to talk about something which is very close to my heart, because I was just graduate fresh from the college when Afghan refugees started coming in. These young people and their professors, they came first, and then came the masses. 4, 5, 6 million people just across the Afghan borders in Pakistan. I went there, I saw them. I could see how honorable, how peaceful these people were, but they were devastated. Now America here and there talks about Afghanistan, but that's the longest lasting and is still ongoing American war in our history. Nothing has been. And in part, it is facilitated by the equipment and all that, that there are fewer Americans are killed. But what is lesser known fact, which nobody dwells on it, those peaceful, poor Afghans. How many are they killed? Nobody is keeping account. And the cycle of war continues. I was in January in Karachi for a family visit, and car stopped on a light. And just like here, over there, a girl came. She was less than maybe 8 or 10-year-old, and she was cleaning, and I could see based on her dress and her hairstyle, that little girl is an Afghan. Yes, I checked, she was. That is the third or the fourth generation of Afghans who are suffering as people killing each other. Now in the news is that the Russians are paying Afghans to kill Americans. This cycle of revenge. There was a time when America was paying Afghans with money, dollars, and guns, and Saudis and Pakistanis together. And I heard some other people as well killing Soviets. To discuss with us is an honorable person who is principled, who was considered a good officer. He turned bad when he resigned from the State Department. His name is Matthew Ho. Welcome to Muslim Network TV, Matthew.
Salam, and thank you for having me on.
Matthew is a member of the advisory board of Expose Facts. In 2009, he resigned his position with the State Department in Afghanistan in protest of the escalation of Afghan war by the Obama administration. And he has 12 years of experience with American wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and with the Marine Corps, also with the Department of Defense and State. He's senior fellow with Center for International Policy, and is a 100% disabled veteran. You have been through a lot. You are very young as compared to myself. You have gone through a lot.
Not as much. I mean, thank you for saying that. But to your point, in your opening comments, what I have gone through is nothing compared to what the Afghans have gone through, or to what the Iraqis have gone through, or to what the Syrians have gone through, or the Pakistanis have gone through, and on and on and on. This world war, I guess, as you could call it, began in the 70s, and has a lot to do with energy resources and oil, but has a lot to do with ideology and power. and it extends now from Mali, in the west of Africa, all the way through Pakistan. Every day, people are being killed. People are being made homeless. People are suffering.
Say, Matthew, it's a thoughtful American like yourself who realize the enormity of it. I mean, people don't know the word Mali, do they? I mean,
No.
what's happening there is absolutely out of horizon of people. I came to know because there is an imam in Chicago Mosque who is from Mali. That's how I came to know what is going on in that country. And Mali is a country, used to be called Timbuktu, which has millions of handwritten manuscripts. The whole African heritage of literary heritage, written literature, is in that area. And I don't know how many of that have survived. Why our country as a country does not know?
Well, I think that we have a narrative about our country that we are some type of exceptional nation, that we are first and foremost. And that's been borne out by our economic situation for at least the last 75 years since the end of the Second World War, by our primacy as a superpower, whether it be alongside us or against the Soviet Union or by ourselves. And then, getting back to this idea of narrative, the mythology of the United States, whether it be that stems from the original doctrine of discovery, which allowed Europeans to colonize and take in the name of God whatever lands they wanted to in the Western Hemisphere, to manifest destiny, which was basically an extension of that doctrine of discovery, which allowed the United States to wage genocide against Native Americans, whether it has been white supremacy, which allowed for slavery, and of course the ongoing oppression of people of color. So there's a lot of different things that you say, why does the United States not care about the outside world? And it adds up to and there's other practical reasons, I suppose. We're remote, we're surrounded by oceans, we're a big country itself. I always understood that in the sense of when you would realize how few Americans have passports compared to the rest of the world, you could understand it in the sense of, well, to go anywhere, and for a long time, you didn't need a passport to go to Canada or Mexico. So there's so much you could travel to within this continent. But those are all excuses. Those are all rationalizations. Those are all, really illegitimate reasons for the United States not to understand the shared humanity that we have with the rest of the world.
And at the same
well
time,
as,
Americans are, by and large, open-heart people. When we hear, we understand, but we don't hear about it. I think we will talk about it a little bit of why we don't hear that through the mainstream media, how our media self-censored it, or funding or whatever issues. We can touch that. But current issue came because of the news that the Russians are paying Afghans or Talibans to kill Americans. Now, this, of course, one thing I'm concerned about is that this cycle of revenge. As a Muslim, I know Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, among the earliest thing he did was this tribal sense of revenge, which will continue forever. He banned completely that particular process and taught people to have reconciliation and common cause, working with each other, and came up with a written constitution to overcome that. But that tribal revenge thing seems to have transferred into nationalistic revenge thing. So why it is hard for Americans to understand that if Americans were paying Afghans to kill Soviets, they are turning it around, doing the same thing to us.
It shouldn't be hard to understand. And it goes back further, right? This goes back to, if you talk to the Russians about this, they'll bring up the fact that the United States invaded both Western and Eastern Russia after the First World War, along with a trove of other Western nations, to fight the Bolshevik Revolution. And this is something that most Americans don't know. Most Americans don't know that the United States invaded Russia at the end of the First World War to stop the Russian Revolution. But the interesting thing about this idea pertaining to Afghanistan is that the reason why this got to the point with the Soviet invasion was that in 1978, 1979, the Jimmy Carter administration, the president of the United States at the time, came up with a plan to start to fund the Islamic militant groups that were in Afghanistan, because the violence in Afghanistan had begun before the Soviet Union invaded. So by the time the Soviet Union invades in 1979, as many as 100,000 people have been killed. And most people don't realize that. Most people think the violence, fighting, the war begins when the Soviet Union invades. But actually, it does not. It begins a couple years earlier. And what the United States does, what Jimmy Carter's presidency decides to do, is decides to try, and by funding these militant groups in Afghanistan, of course, on the southern border of the Soviet Union, was going to try and cause so much chaos in Afghanistan that it would bait the Soviet Union into invading. That the Soviet Union would feel that they had to invade Afghanistan in order to make Afghanistan stable, so that unrest wouldn't move into the southern Soviet republics, which were also primarily Muslim, or at least a plurality Muslim. The rationale behind that was that the United States was going to pay back the Soviet Union for the Soviet Union's support for the North Vietnamese, and that the United States was going to trap the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, just as the United States was trapped in Vietnam. And as a plan, it did work, because the Soviet Union did spend almost 10 years in Afghanistan in a terribly costly war for them, but also too, especially for the Afghans, more than at least 1 million Afghans died, probably more, and which caused this unrest and this instability that still exists today. So this notion of revenge goes back even farther than just that period in the 1980s when the Soviet Union was fighting in Afghanistan. This extends back to the Vietnam War, and ultimately, if you take it back far enough, it extends back to the end of the First World War.
But Matthew, tell me this: why everybody in America is surprised at this find? I mean, in Pakistan, in last one or two couple of years, I heard this thing from people. Of course, I had no way to research that Russians are helping Taliban fight Americans. That was a sort of a street knowledge to be heard even by a visitor for a few days. So why America didn't know early enough about that?
Again, I think it goes back to your first question, that we talked a bit about why are we so insular in the United States? Why do we think ourselves so special? Why is there such poor international reporting done by the United States media? But this really goes to show how secluded, how much of a bubble the United States has been in during these last 20 years of constant United States warfare. And of course, that warfare actually precedes that, but just to simplify, let's say last 20 years. So the idea that somehow we are touched by it, somehow that the other side, whoever that may be, is going to fight back, it comes as a surprise to many Americans. And I think that is a very good assessment of how these wars have been conducted against so many hundreds of millions of people with hardly any effect on the American public itself. And now particularly the way American warfare has evolved with technology, and then as well as too with the use of proxy forces, whether they be, say, the Shia militias in Iraq, the Kurdish militias in Syria, the Afghan government in Afghanistan, as well as in the technology with drones. You see very little American casualties. So even now, there's less awareness of the wars occurring in the United States, because the United States is incurring even less cost in these wars than we were incurring 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. But I always think back to, I'm sure many people are familiar with the WikiLeaks video that was, or when WikiLeaks released the video of the helicopter killing those people, murdering those people on the streets of Baghdad, including a couple of journalists. And I remember being on television at the time on MSNBC, which is one of the major American cable news networks here, and being asked about it. And I was alongside of somebody who I disagree with frequently, but we agreed on this at the time, and he was former military as well, was the shock to us was that people were shocked about what they were seeing. In the sense of, what do you think we've been doing in those countries for all these years? You know, so a video emerges like that, when details or a story emerge about people being killed in cold blood, or somebody fighting back, or just with this Russian bounty story, the unintended consequences of war, the intricacies, the complexities, the tentacles of it, right? You know, the fact that Americans are surprised about it shows how little Americans are aware of it to begin with.
That's so true. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. I'm talking with Matthew Ho, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe, and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
It's Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah. Let's explore.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with Matthew Ho. You know, when you resigned in 2009, at that time, Ambassador Holbrook was the Afghan in charge of Afghanistan, a special envoy, perhaps from America. You were flown in to talk to him so he could convince you to stay in. And I don't know how did the meeting go, but he publicly said that you were a good officer, quote unquote. So what made you a good officer and why you turned bad?
Well, to answer the first question, the meeting went really quite well. He actually convinced me to stay. I had a meeting with him at the Waldorf Astoria in New York, one of the big, fancy New York hotels. And he actually convinced me to stay. which I then, after accepting his offer, very persuasive man. And but after a few days, I resigned. I declined it after 2 or 3 days after reflection on it, because I knew ultimately that I just would have to resign again. That for me, I understood exactly how the American empire worked, how American military worked. I understood that the Obama administration was no different than the Bush administration when it came to these issues. And so I think what made me a good officer in that vein was that I studied it, that I took the time to learn as much as I could, to really humble myself, and to learn as much as I could from not from other Americans, but from when I was in Iraq, from Iraqis, when I was in Afghanistan, from Afghans, when I've been in other parts of the world, from those people in that world, and understanding that the story is not about us. The story is not about the United States. The story is about what is happening in that place at the moment, what has led up to that moment, and what is likely to occur going forward.
So the knowledge was the main difference.
I think so. I think so. I had I was working with a translator one time in Afghanistan, and this was in 2009, late in 2009, actually, or summer of 2009, I guess. And he referenced, we had just met a member of the Afghan government. And he said to me as we were leaving, he had been part of the Communist Party. And during the 1970s and 1980s, there were two wings of the Communist Party in Afghanistan. And I asked him which wing of the party was he a part of? And John, his name was John, stopped and he looked at me and he said, "I've been working with Americans for more than 8 years now, and you're the first American who knew that there were two wings of the Afghan Communist Party." So it was like that type of knowledge in the terms of the study, I think, but also to talking and wanting to know more. So I think that was what Holbrook was getting at, was my earnestness in it, my desire to truly understand the situation. And Afghanistan, when I understood the situation, was no different than what the situation had been in Iraq. Again, that the Obama administration,
that was in your 4-page resignation letter, that I have lost, quote, "I have lost understanding of and confidence in the strategic purposes of the United States presence in Afghanistan." So what was the purpose then and what is the purpose now?
well, the purpose,
You didn't understood then.
I think I really do believe that. I mean, if you can go back, we can go back all the way back to the 70s, right? But if you want, just for the sake of simplicity, and we only have an hour a show to do, we can begin with, say, the George W. Bush administration and after 9/11. And I do believe that after 9/11, the American president, felt a need for domestic political reasons to achieve revenge, to carry out justice. And so the offers by the Taliban to hand bin Laden over to a third country, the offers of other nations to intercede, were pushed aside because the United States, what was best for the United States at that point was revenge, was vengeance, was because that was what was best politically for the American president. And then the United States becomes involved in Afghanistan, sees it as a triumph of Western values, of Western democracy, because you have to remember that in the 1990s, there was American foreign policy was buoyed by these ideas that we were at the end of history, that with the end of the Cold War,
there was a book actually, End of
Exactly right. And Francis Fukuyama wrote this book called The End of History.
And then came this Clash of Civilization.
Exactly. Sam Huntington's, and those two books had a tremendous impact on the American foreign policy establishment, as well as the United Kingdom and other places too. But so this idea that somehow the United States is policies in Afghanistan, the remaking of Afghanistan, the settling of, as Huntington would call, border areas, right? These borderlands, these uncivilized parts of the world, the settling and remaking of that was very important for a proof of concept almost. And I heard this when I was at the State Department in 2005 working on the Iraq desk. You heard people talking about this because at that point, Afghanistan was viewed as a success story in 2005. Whether or not it was, at least in the United States, it was being viewed as a success story. And what was being done there, and this proof of concept of Western civilization being spread, democracy being spread. So after this revenge, this need for vengeance, comes this idealistic crusade. And then when what has occurred in Afghanistan, when the reality was in Afghanistan, there were two sides fighting in civil war. We took one side out of the civil war and put the other side in charge without doing anything to reconcile or to resolve the conflict. And so the side we put in power immediately went after and started punishing the other side, which is primarily rural Pashtuns.
Tell me this, Matthew. Sorry to break your train of thought,
Yeah.
but a little bit moving away from. So America was there, along with Pakistan, but Pakistanis claimed that they were as much of a victim of American warfare as they were partners. And their claim is 70,000 Pakistanis lost their lives in American adventure in Afghanistan. When you were there, how you saw that relationship?
So when I got there in 2009, the Pakistani Taliban, which of course is different than the Afghan Taliban, was moving quite forcefully out of the Pashtun tribal areas and kind of heading towards the non-Pashtun parts of Pakistan towards Punjab. And then, of course, there's a big fight in the Swat Valley at that point in 2009. And so there's a lot of criticism of Pakistan because Pakistan hadn't done enough, hadn't been tough enough. And the reality was, just as you said, sir, at that point, the Pakistanis had lost a lot of people. They had in 2009. I don't know what the total would have been, but certainly in the tens of thousands of fighting that occurred because in 2004, 2005, around at the behest of the Americans, Pakistan sends its army into the tribal areas of Western Pakistan, which had been basically autonomous areas since the creation of Pakistan and going back into British colonial administration. So the fighting was very intense. Where I was in eastern Afghanistan at the time, I would constantly see U.S. drones heading into Pakistan, as well as American commandos heading into Pakistan. Because you'd see the helicopters just going east, and you knew exactly where they were going, as well as the briefings I would have and the information I had. But the criticisms of Pakistan were continual. And lots of pointing the finger at Pakistan, saying what was happening in Afghanistan was Pakistan's fault, pointing the finger at Afghanistan, saying that if Pakistan stopped supporting the Taliban, this war would be over.
So Pakistan could do what America fails to do, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. And in the meantime, no acknowledgement of the mass amount of casualties that were being occurred by the Pakistani army, let alone the suffering of the Pakistani people, the continued. And now here we are, and I'm talking about a period of time in 2009, 11 years later, where the violence in Pakistan has, of course, ebbed and waned over the last 11 years, but the suffering has been constant. And just as in so many other parts of the Muslim world, from Western Africa to Pakistan, you have a whole generation of children who are growing up afraid of the sky, afraid of the drones that are constantly overhead, the drones that carry Hellfire missiles and 100-pound bombs. Constantly afraid of them. So you have a whole generation of children growing up with PTSD.
Howard, sorry to interrupt you.
Mhm.
Howard Wright writes in his book that mission statement of CIA was to go kill Soviet soldiers, quote unquote. Is that how military phrases its mission statement? Of course, these are 3-4 letters, 3-4 words, but is this as direct as this?
You won't find that written down. It won't be. It will be put into jargon, and it will be very wordy, just like any organization that anyone else belongs to. Maybe even worse, because the U.S. military is so big and it is so bureaucratic. A mission order, or even the CIA, is quite large and quite bureaucratic. A mission order would not be that concise or that simple. It would be drawn out and however, the intent of it, the spirit of it would have been and was exactly that in the 1980s. And they were quite proud of it, the CIA. They thought they were getting revenge on the Soviet Union for Vietnam. They thought they were doing an active part to win the Cold War.
Did you join the military to take revenge?
No, I joined the military in January 1998 because I had been working in finance and I was bored. I was out of college. I was working for a while. I was bored. And this seemed like a way to be part of something that was bigger than myself. It seemed like a way to be part of something that I would help. I'd be able to prove myself, take on a lot of responsibility, as well as be part of history. Take part in things going around the world.
What did you think? You thought you're going to do accounting for the military?
No, by no means. And it's interesting because so often in the late 90s, you still had colonels and generals in the Marine Corps, in the U.S. Marine Corps, who have been in Vietnam. And they swore up and down that the United States would never do anything like Vietnam again. There was a Marine Corps general called Smedley Butler, who was highly decorated, the most highly decorated military officer in American military history, actually. And he left the Marine Corps in the 1930s after denouncing American imperialism. He basically said, all his time fighting in Central America and fighting in China and other places had just been as part of the racket. That he was, as he said, he was a muscle man for the bankers and for Wall Street, for the financiers. And so there was this tradition. So when you went in, and so you had this idea that somehow things were different. At that point, the wars in the Balkans, and we understand those wars now, and they weren't as straightforward as they seemed then, but it seemed as if the United States had intervened for humanitarian purposes. The idea was that the United States was not going to make the mistakes of the past, which of course was my own.
You joined for adventurism. You did not join. So you joined. Would you think you will make the same decision now if you have to?
Oh, no, absolutely not. No.
What is your advice to young Muslims who might be listening to this show and thinking about joining the military?
Don't give the benefit of the doubt to the military. That's what I did. I actually was very opposed to the Gulf War. It's a long story, but the first Gulf War, the first Iraq War in 1990, 1991, I was very opposed. I was a senior in high school, so I was 17, 18 years old. And at different times, I had different feelings towards the military. And that came a lot from my religious values, my moral values. And so I was always giving the institution, the military, the American government, the benefit of the doubt, even though I was so well read in history, even though I understood what the United States had done around the world and what the United States was doing around the world. I also saw the military as a way for me, again, it was to experience things, but also I never thought I'd have a career in the military in terms of spending 25, 30 years in the military and retiring as a general. But I thought I'd have a career in the United States government where I would be a diplomat or I'd be a policy person. But, my advice to people is that, to young people, and I say this all the time, there are other ways to prove yourselves. If you feel that you have to go in the military to prove yourself, there are other avenues to do that. You can become a firefighter. You could join the Forest Service and fight wildfires. You can join the Coast Guard and save people from sinking ships. I mean, there's a lot of things out there that people can do to serve, because that's part of it for a lot of people, as well as to find themselves. But the reality is about the American military is it does do some things very well. It takes people from around the country, people from different races, different backgrounds, and it brings them together. It teaches them skills. It gives them a lot of responsibilities. But the problem is, at the end of that, it sends people around the world to kill. And that is my frustration with the United States, is that we can do something like the American military, whose end purpose is to kill and to cause mass suffering.
Well,
we certainly could do something
take a short
different,
break,
right?
and we will talk more about that. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with Matthew Ho, and you're watching Muslim Network TV on Galaxy 19 satellite, on Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and pretty soon on Apple TV as well. We'll be right back after these messages.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. Past campaigns covered a wide range of humanitarian concerns. Through Bosnia Task Force, imams and leaders of Chicago's Muslim community worked to ensure Bosnia became a top national issue. This led to life-saving American policies in Bosnia. A key accomplishment was helping to get rape declared a war crime. Initiatives also included Kosovo Task Force, Central African Republic Task Force, and Flint Coalition, which brought awareness to the water crisis affecting the people of Flint, Michigan. Highlights of our work include supporting Black Lives Matter, Parliament of the World's Religions, addressing climate change.
So wasteful consumption starts the ruthless production, and that's where we need all the fossil fuel in the world.
And prominent media exposure.
This is Imam Malik Mujahid, President of Justice for All.
And I'm the Director of Outreach for Justice for All.
And that's why we need to go back to what worked.
Today we're demanding an apology from the CEO of Costco.
The Chinese crackdown on Uyghurs and other Turkic people has only gotten worse.
Current programs such as Burma Task Force advocate for the rights of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, internally displaced populations, and all those denied freedom of movement and at risk of starvation. Through this, we mobilized thousands of calls to elected representatives. This paved the way for the U.S. to increase funding for Rohingya refugees from $30 million to over $600 million. 2 of our documentaries were featured on international news outlets. The Rohingya People, A Slow-Burning Genocide, on BBC World News, and Rohingya Refugees Tell of Massacre was featured on CNN. We've organized rallies, UN mission visits, expanded presentations on campuses, promoted research and report writing, outreach to think tanks, media, and other influencers. Faith Coalition educates about the Rohingya genocide and crimes against humanity faced by ethnic groups in Burma. We've traveled to refugee camps, convened a meeting of Karen, Kachin, and Rohingya leaders, both to encourage cooperation and to guide them in congressional outreach. We organized Rohingya Advocacy Day. This led to over 100 participants visiting the offices of 60 U.S. senators and congressional representatives. Free Kashmir advocates for the people of Kashmir. Long-term goals include the call for self-determination, the end of the Indian military's occupation of the territory, and raising awareness of Kashmiri issues among the American people. After the August 5th reinvasion of Kashmir, we organized national protests in front of various Indian government buildings, partnered with Stand with Kashmir, and launched a petition condemning the Gates Foundation's decision to present Prime Minister Modi a humanitarian award. Save Uyghur informs Muslims and neighbors of other faiths about the ongoing cultural genocide of Uyghur Muslims and mobilizes public support. Our projects include boycotting Chinese products with our Fast from China campaign, pushing Bill S-178 in the Senate, and organizing a nationwide protest of Costco. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with Matthew Ho. Matthew, I want to understand and help our listeners, so people who are watching us, to understand a little bit of inner working. And that idea came to my mind is that Ambassador Holbrook, who mentioned that, who tried to convince you successfully for a few days to stay. He said, and I quote in Washington Post, that inside the building, bring the change inside the building than outside, quote unquote. And I don't know how you responded to him over there. You were convinced, but what is the internal mechanism of State Department to have this discussion and a discourse in a way that you find out something going to happen about the knowledge you're bringing to the table?
So the way it works for the State Department when they have their people in countries like Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever, is that the people are sent there for 1 year at a time, and the majority of them never leave the embassy. I was different in a sense that I was a political officer and I was sent out and I was in the provinces, and so I was with the military and on small bases, and I worked very closely with Afghan governors. I lived when I was in the south in Zabul province. I lived literally across the street from the Afghan governor, and I saw him every day for lunch and dinner. And so my proximity was different than the vast majority of Americans who were serving in Afghanistan. And I hate using the word serving, who were in Afghanistan. And many of them don't ever even meet Afghans because at the embassy, there are only a handful of Afghans working there, and many people who are working different jobs on the embassy are brought in from the United States or brought in from other countries.
Wow.
So
like Zalmi Khalilzad type.
Yeah, exactly. But not even that, but even say people who are mechanics or people who are cooks or people who are drivers or anything, gardeners, the people who cut the grass, many times are either Americans or they are what are called TCNs, third country nationals. They come from Bangladesh, they come from India, they come from Pakistan. Many times, wherever the contract is, that's where they'll come from, because the Afghans, and the same was true in Iraq, the Afghans are deemed too much of a security risk. So I think that's important for people to understand, is that you can have a State Department officer, and the same goes for the military, go to Afghanistan, spend a year in Afghanistan, and never speak to an Afghan. So you have what then occurs is that the people who do hear from Afghans very often are only hearing from Afghans who are on the United States payroll. So of course, what you're hearing is exactly what they expect that you want to hear. And that's true again, whether it be for somebody who is, whatever job they're doing. It doesn't have to be intelligence, because most intelligence is paid for, or a lot of intelligence is paid for. Just to talk about intelligence for a second, intelligence can come from a different ways. One, it can come from intercepting phone calls and emails and radio transmissions. It could also come from what's called human intelligence, which either mostly comes from paying people for intelligence, which is, as people can imagine, just gives awful results, or from torture, which is routine for the Afghan government, and was routine for the American government for many years, and may still be. We don't know. And torture, of course, never gives. Torture gives the answer that you want. It doesn't give the factual correct answer. It gives the answer that the torturer wants to hear. And so that's all to say that the information that then comes from Afghanistan, from the State Department back to Washington, D.C., is basically the information that comes from either sources that shouldn't be trusted, incomplete sources, or just from what Americans themselves see and observe. So the information is often very incomplete, to say the least.
So tell me, when you're thinking of resigning, were there other State Department people who were thinking of resigning?
Yes. And the interesting thing is, so when I sent in my resignation letter and it went through the chain within Afghanistan, I was in Zabul province. And so I just had to send it to the embassy, and then it made its way back to Washington, D.C., where Richard Holbrooke saw it. And then he actually sent it to Secretary Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and to President Obama. And I do know that President Obama did read the letter. And it had, of course, no effect, right? But within the embassy, my counterparts who were in the most violent parts of Afghanistan, so my counterparts in Kandahar, Helmand, Narangar, Uruzgan, Nuristan, they saw this letter and they wrote me, and I remember 6 of them agreed with me. As well as, too, when I got back to the embassy, this is what was so weird. When I got back to the embassy and had to I spent days with Ambassador Eikenberry, who was the American ambassador in Afghanistan. I had to meet with all different types of other officials, and almost all of them agreed with me. I heard very little dissent. And what most people said to me, I shouldn't say, but a lot of people said to me, was that I wish I could do what you were doing, but I have 2 kids who are going to college soon. So this is what's called the golden handcuffs. You get to a certain point within a career in the military and intelligence and the State Department where to resign would be a financial catastrophe, where to resign would cause hardship for you and your family. Now, I was a single person. I had no children, no wife. I didn't have to worry about anything like that. And so I was free to do it. But I did have a number of people who said, I wish I could do what you were doing.
How many people in the State Department throughout this longest lasting American war do you think have resigned because of confusion on Afghan policy?
I believe I am the only one. There have been other U.S. State Department people who have resigned over the Iraq War, when the Iraq War began in 2003, including Ann Wright, who,
yes.
Yeah, I'm sure you know Ann. Ann, and for people who don't know Ann was a colonel in the Army. She went on to become a diplomat in the United States State Department, and she was actually when the United States reopened its embassy in Afghanistan in 2001, she was the deputy ambassador. She was second in charge of the embassy there, and she has been all over the world, and she speaks out against the American empire quite eloquently and strongly. She's amazing. She's a hero of mine. I want to become Anne when I become older, I guess. But
well, if you stayed to become second in command in an embassy, you would become part Anne.
Well, I mean, if I had stayed, exactly, it would have. If I had stayed, I would have had a career. I was quite senior for my age at the time. I had received a direct appointment into the Foreign Service, and at that point, I was 36 years old, and I was in a position where, yeah, I probably should have been 45 or 46 years old to be in that position. So I know quite well what could have occurred for me. And I have seen colleagues of mine, people who were peers of mine 10 years ago, 11 years ago, who stayed in, who continued to support the wars, who went along with the policies, who then, at the end of the Obama administration have risen to become quite senior people at the Pentagon or at the CIA or the State Department, who have become deputy assistant secretaries or assistant secretaries of defense, those kinds of things. So I know quite well as too, the amount of money that the United States spends on these wars, the private opportunities. So much of these wars are sustained by private corporations, whether they provide cooks and drivers and mechanics, whether they provide bodyguards, whether they provide policy analysts, people who work on policy. So I know full well where I would have been if I had stayed in, and I never regret it. I mean, I never regret it at all.
You mentioned somewhere that I'm not some peacenik, pot smoking hippie who wants everyone to be in love. Now, and then you also said there are plenty of dudes who need to be killed. Do you still feel the same way, or you have become one of those?
I've become one of those. I have, and it just was really, it's an evolution. It's being exposed to things outside of what the establishment of what established interests tell you. My first surprise when I dealt with the peace movement was how well informed they were, how knowledgeable they were. They knew more about these wars. They knew more about Iraq and Afghanistan and now, of course, Yemen and Syria. They know more about what's happening there than nearly anyone else in this United States, I feel. They so many of the leaders of the
Matthew, wait a minute. I have never heard anyone giving such a major tribute to the peace movement, that they are more informed about what's happening than the people making decisions in the State Department.
Absolutely. The people who lead organizations like Code Pink or Peace Action, Veterans for Peace, these are people who have who come to this because of an understanding. Because they understand what the United States is doing overseas. They understand what is happening to people around the world. They understand the motivations that drive the United States.
Then why they don't succeed? I mean, there are very few people like that. I mean, their communication with America is not that high. I mean, I remember in the first or the second Gulf War, marching in Chicago, tens of thousands of people.
Yeah.
Hardly anybody marches against war any longer. Is peace movement, anti-war movement, is a dead phenomena because you guys are peacenik and pot-smoking people?
I think there's some of that stigma. I think there's some of that stigma. Some of it is the way the media handles it. I think about Medea Benjamin, who is a founder of Code Pink, who has written really terrific books on a variety of topics, who knows about these wars and the consequences on them better than anything else. She got a lot of notoriety because she interrupted Barack Obama at a speech one time, asking him about the drones and the killings of the drones. And when she was interviewed by CNN about it, all they wanted to talk to her about was not about whether the drones were killing innocent people, whether this was a violation of international law, et cetera, et cetera. They wanted to know why she felt compelled to be rude to the president of the United States. So some of it is the way the media has handled it. Some of it is because Barack Obama and the Obama presidency took the wind out of that peace movement, took the wind out of the anti-war movement.
So here's one of us leading the country, right?
That's exactly right. And, anyone who's part of a left-wing organization or a Democratic organization or a organization that is aligned somehow with whether it's true or not with the idea of the president can speak to this, how membership drops, how fundraising drops. I belong to a think tank, which is a left-wing think tank. And when George Bush is in office, when Donald Trump is in office, money is coming in. When Barack Obama or Bill Clinton's in office, we're having trouble paying rent because people.
So you mean we should keep Trump in office so we keep.
That's right. We need new computers. So
listen, before we conclude this show, Matthew, so much for coming in here, but something very personal. I mean, you appreciated New York Times article about suicide has been deadlier than combat for the military. I mean, you personally went through thinking every day about it. How are you feeling personally? Have you overcome those difficult times?
You can never overcome it. There's a change in your brain chemistry, as well as, of course, the cracking of your soul that occurs that can never be fully healed. So you have to manage it, and you have to live your life in a manner that is consistent with your values. What's occurring, and there is actually just another study that came out, the New York Times Magazine, a journalist named Nick Terse wrote the article about suicide in American commandos. And it pointed the study that the American Special Operations Forces did, because they're having high suicide rates among their commandos, was that a lot of it has to do with ethical and moral dilemmas. When you go to war, unjust wars, and also too what we would call just wars, because we see high rates of suicide in World War II veterans, and that is supposedly a just war. You see these. There is the consequences of killing, the moral effect. And this is what occurred to me after being in Iraq twice. I went to Afghanistan in 2009 as a morally broken person. And that's why I quit, why I gave up, because I was morally broken. I couldn't go along with it anymore. Right. And so I left because I knew what was happening was wrong. I could no longer lie to myself. But the consequences of that eventually lead to suicide, because that moral injury, as it's called, that profound guilt, it's so deep, it's so existential, because it's going against all the values that you hold as a person, that it causes such distress that suicide becomes like, and that is in the United States government, the United States Veterans Administration has known for more than 30 years now, about 30 years now.
I hate to stop this conversation. I'm so thankful to you. Talking to you, I feel I'm personally becoming a better person. May God bless you, give you good health, and you continue to be a ambassador of peace in our country. Your voice needs to reach a whole lot more people, and I'm happy that you spared your time to talk to our audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I was talking with Matthew, who has served our country on both sides, from inside and from outside, as a peacemaker. You're watching Muslim Network TV on Galaxy 19 satellite, on Roku, and on Amazon Fire TV. And we're always there with unique conversation, in-depth and insightful conversations. Our producer is Sumaya Heather. Thank you, Sumaya. And Zahra Nadeem for being a backup producer. Peace and salam.